with Ethan yesterday, so we'll start with Chris.
Aww.
Alright, Chris, so the first one was westward expansion, easy land policy, and internal improvements. Was the North for it, against it, or mixed?
Can you write what was the question again?
Westward improvement, like westward land. They were against it, rolling dice. I'm not gonna be drawn on board with it. Alright, so, for it, against it, or mixed, with the idea of westward improvements, or westward going west?
What?
For the south, were they for it, against it, or mixed?
They were for it.
Final answer, just checking.
Yeah.
Nope. Yes, they were mixed, roll your dice.
Just like.
Alright, the west, were they for? Westward, yeah. Westward, you were roll your dice. Alright, banks, were the north for them, against them, or mixed?
For.
They were for them. Alright, so,
Seven.
yes, they were, with the idea, okay, whoa.
You read it.
I was thinking about the next question.
Huh.
So,
They were
banks,
mixed.
they were mixed, final answer.
Yes.
Miss Garrett, the correct answer this time. So mixed, final answer. No,
They were what was?
south with the banks.
You said engaged. They were against.
Final answer?
Yeah.
No,
They were for.
for it. So they're either indifferent, like they didn't care, or they were for it. Woo! Alright, banks for the west, for it, against it, or mixed?
Mixed.
Final answer? No,
Against.
against. Remember they blamed it for the depression, 1819. Alright, correct problem. Tariff, were the north for it, against it, or mixed?
Against.
Tariff, north, final answer? I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
No,
I didn't know that. You said against. For it.
for, remember the north liked the tariffs, they were mainly manufacturing. Alright, south, were they for it, against it, or mixed? With the tariffs? Tariffs.
South.
Against.
They were against it with the south. Alright, west for the tariffs, for it, against, or mixed? Mixed, they were mixed for that one. Alright, probably easiest one, slavery, north, were they for it, against it, or mixed?
Okay.
Good job. Alright, south, for slavery,
You were with it.
they were for it. Alright, west, for it, against slavery, or mixed?
Mixed.
Final answer?
Yeah.
No.
Against.
Nope.
For.
For, not in the western states, for the western states were for slavery. Alright, so, what was the compromise that let Missouri and Maine come in as states?
Maine. Missouri compromise.
Missouri compromise. Which one was the free state, Maine or Missouri?
Maine.
Good job. What year was the favorite son's election?
It was in the 1800s?
Yes.
Got all ones. 18. 20?
20.
30.
Final answer.
Yeah.
Nope.
1824.
824. Elections are every 4 years. So you can't have an odd number of
I was
elections.
kind of wondering, man.
It's every 4 years.
No, I didn't know.
It's in there.
So.
Alright, who was the favorite son for the North?
Andrew Jackson.
Final answer? Just making sure because of the mask.
Sure. Yes.
No.
No.
John. Quincy Adams.
So John Quincy Adams, I'm just making sure because of the mask.
Yes.
Yes, it's correct. Favorite son of the South?
What?
Crawfish? Crawford?
Crawford.
Yes.
Final answer? That is it, William Crawford.
Crawfish.
Alright, so there were 2 favorite sons of the West. What were they?
William.
Oh, which one start with?
See the last name.
You know, I don't know.
Okay, Genesis.
Just
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson, who's the other one?
Henry Klein.
Good job.
what a guess. I was just gonna
Alright, so because of this, you have the party split now into 2 parties. What was the name for the group that followed Jackson?
Let's start with
D.
Dictatorship.
Democrat. Democrat.
Alright, I'll take it. The Democratic Republicans is the full name for it.
Yeah, they were both.
Let's see. Alright, what was the tariff of abomination? The tariff of what? What year?
18.
Good job.
Twelve.
1812? Final answer?
Yes.
No.
Is it in 1810s?
Nope.
Is it 18, like 18, between 1801 and 1810?
No.
1810.
Is it, 18?
My last help. No. Talk about states' rights. Last name begins with C, but there's several last name people with C's. Alright?
Calhoun.
Calhoun, John C. Calhoun. Alright, who was the president that ran his presidency? Administration?
Jackson.
Yeah, like a dictatorship or like a military organization. Alright, what was Jackson's Secretary of State? Or I guess who was Jackson's Secretary of State? You better way to word that.
What did it start with?
His last name technically begins with a V, but it's something something.
I don't know.
Okay?
Martin Van Buren.
Martin Van Buren. So technically Van Buren is the whole last name.
Imagine getting the best last name back in 2 days.
Alright, so who was Jackson's first vice president? They ended up disagreeing and he ends up quitting.
What did it start with?
C.
Calhoun.
Calhoun. John C. Calhoun.
Sorry.
Careful, y'all, the camera can pick up y'all much better than they can pick up me. So stuff like that, you don't want to blow out James'
It
earbuds.
was an accident.
Alright, so what was the name for Jackson's unofficial group of advisors? He had his official
Kitchen cabinet?
kitchen cabinet.
Why couldn't it be bathroom?
The bathroom cabinet.
Alright, for Congress, who defended the principle of states' rights? We had these two guys debate the idea of state rights versus the union. Who defended states' rights?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Let's start with
H.
his first name.
A last name.
Say it again?
Who defended state rights in Congress? There was this great debate between these two people.
Horatio Nelson.
Okay, that didn't sound like that was right, so no.
It's an underwear brand, right?
Let's not say that.
It's a sock brand.
Robert Hayne.
I'm sorry.
Robert Hayne.
Oh,
It's a sock
yeah.
brand.
Alright, so.
I remember that now.
Hey, if it helps you remember that, okay?
I do
Let's not
remember.
say that
No,
in
I
class
don't test it.
anymore. Alright, so, who defended the union?
What's his name start with?
W. He did not write the dictionary.
X, Y.
He didn't.
He did not.
Wait, what?
He didn't write the dictionary.
Are they brothers?
Dictionary though?
I don't know if I can help you.
You know, I'm just gonna say Webster.
Good job. What's the first name? So there's two Websters.
Matthews.
I know it.
Noah Webster and Daniel Webster. Which one?
No.
I know it.
Daniel, you said?
He said Noah.
He
Yeah.
said no.
Paul, because you got Webster.
I believe he said Noah.
You better know next time.
No. She was the
Alright,
dictionary.
what
so I
was the
said-
treaty that was made between the smaller branch of the Cherokee and the federal government saying that they choose to move?
Treaty of Cherokees.
That's a good guess. So that's
What?
Is it like really hard?
Sorta. It starts with an E. It's an Indian word.
Free
Oh.
Just try your best.
Echo something.
Say it again.
Echo or Echo.
Equal.
If no one gets closer, we'll let you have it.
It's Oda.
Echota is correct. So,
Echota?
Treaty of
Why do you know how to pronounce that?
Google. Look it up.
Ebola.
Alright, so what was the name of the Cherokee's journey?
12 years.
Good job. Alright,
Oh,
so what was the bill that gave the president authority to use the Army and Navy to enforce revenue laws if necessary? To enforce revenue laws.
Nice.
Is it easy or like?
No, it's not.
Sorta.
It's not
Super
easy.
hard.
It's not.
I don't know if I would listen to them.
I really-
They seem like they're kind of out to get you lately.
Yeah.
It starts with an F.
What does it sound like?
Oh.
Well, it's to enforce revenue laws.
It starts with
Force.
Force bill. Roll.
Yeah.
You should have told me
It's
it was
so
an act
hard.
to go or what?
Nah, I need your help.
Alright, so who was the president of the National Bank that applied for a charter early? Last name begins with a B. This is a weird last name. I'm not trying to help you with this one.
Wait, what? Who? What?
Who was the
What?
president of the National Bank? His last name begins with a B.
Falling apart.
Is it Van Buren?
Nope, that's
Oh.
that's that's Secretary of State in this period. Alright?
I don't know.
Alright? Who was the president of the National Bank? He applied for a charter early. Trying to make Jackson look bad. Didn't work.
God.
No.
It's like a long name, isn't it?
Sort
It has
of.
ski at the end of it.
No.
Isn't it Boros? It's like
No.
oh stop.
Alright.
I was gonna say a name.
Okay,
Bartholomew.
that's a good name, but that's not it. Alright,
It's not
Nicholas,
even this.
Nicholas Biddle.
Oh,
Biddle.
that's right.
Biddle.
Nicholas.
Nicholas Biddle.
I remember that.
I remember that.
Biddle.
Alright, made a little bit further. Alright,
I'm
who was
gonna play you
Secretary
like a
of
fiddle.
Treasury for Jackson? So he helped Jackson basically remove all funds from the National Bank, trying to get rid of it.
Start with.
T.
Oh. I know.
Say it then.
It's like. Is it? Is it like I can see it on the
Okay,
page?
you gotta
in
go.
my
I'm running out of
brain.
time.
Say it again, please.
Tails, tags, tackles.
Secretary of Treasury.
I don't remember.
Okay?
I don't know.
I can see it on the page in my brain
I'm
though.
happy for you.
Secretary of the Treasury.
For Jackson.
Was it,
You gotta go.
Imperial.
Nope.
King.
Nope.
John Tyler.
Nope.
John.
Alright,
I was
Roger
like,
B.
it's
Tawny.
like a
I'm
Tawny.
Tawny.
I was like Tanny. I
I
said
thought it was
Tanny.
It looks like Tanny. Tawny.
What's it?
Tammy.
Tommy.
Johnny?
Tommy.
Tommy.
Alright,
I don't remember that.
Alright, what is, let's see. Alright, against which country did Jackson, I'm trying to collect, damages into the United States, and we almost went to war with them in the Jacksonian era, but we didn't.
What country?
What country? They were offended by what Jackson said.
What's that?
F,
They got burned down.
France.
France.
Burned down Portland.
Alright, what was the party that formed up just against Jackson?
We.
Whigs.
Wig.
Whigs.
Your wig offends me.
Alright, who won the election of 1836? It was Jackson's chosen successor.
What? John Tyler.
Final answer? I'm just making sure because
What's
of
he
the
start
math.
with?
V.
A V?
John Tyler.
Martin Van Buren.
Martin Van Buren.
Why weren't they called the Weeds?
Why is there an H in it?
Maybe, are you thinking?
I was not.
No, let's not go there. Let's
The
not.
weed.
Alright, so, what was something that caused the Panic of 1837? There's lots of things, pick one.
You can do it.
No.
18 what?
37.
Wasn't it, Andrew, no, wasn't it part of it was westward expansion or something like that? Or no, you did.
Fine, that. I would like, what about it?
Can you give me a hint?
Okay, there's either S or S or
Yes.
Or X or
Is it
E.
something to do with Andrew Jackson?
Yes.
Is it Andrew Jackson's, like, being elected?
I don't know if it was directly him being elected that led to
Like,
it, but it was several things that he did, like what did he do?
He was ruling like a democracy, like he was ruling like a dictator.
Okay, you gotta be a little bit more specific than that. There are several things he did that basically hurt the economy and didn't tank until Martin Van Buren, before Martin Van Buren was stuck with it. But what are some things that he did that specifically affected the economy? A couple things we talked about.
Which one of them sounded?
S.
Another
S.
S and then P.
I guess, yeah, P or B. There's a bunch of them. No.
That affected the economy.
Yes. We gotta go. Alright?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Is one of them something with the bank?
Yeah, I'll
You
take
got
that.
rid of the national bank.
Okay, try to get rid of as much as you could by basically pulling out funds from it. So you have the wildcat banks that sprang up. You had specie circular,
I was gonna say that, okay.
speculation.
I was gonna
So
say-
there was a bunch of stuff.
I was
So just
gonna
make
say
note
that.
that it was Martin Van Buren that was stuck with it, but Jackson caused a lot of the issues for the Panic of 1837. Alright, what was Martin Van Buren's solution to it? Since he didn't have a bank necessarily, he did it a different way.
What's the term?
Starts with I. It's something something system.
Isosceles triangle.
That's a good word, but no. Okay.
Something to do with inflation?
Geometry.
That was part of the reason why we had
I
a
read, we
panic.
just had the question for Homer too. There was a question about it on Homer.
Yeah, there was actually, I believe.
Really?
Not
No.
really.
No.
No, it was like, it was Friday before.
I don't think it's been recently. I don't know.
'Cause
Okay, but it
something-
was-
When was the, who was that, who brought the system to Jackson?
You're thinking of spoil system. I think that's coming. Okay. Reckon you know? Okay.
I don't know anymore.
I don't think it was. Maybe. It was from Friday, so it was not there.
No.
Okay.
No.
Friday's homework?
Alright, independent treasury system.
My turn.
Independent treasury
That was
system.
my question, so.
Okay, last question for you, and then we gotta stop. Alright, let me go back there. Alright, what were the two states that came in with the Missouri Compromise?
Oh, wow.
Give him an easy one.
Which one?
West
Maine and
Chapter
Missouri.
Roll. Alright, who got 30 or more? Who made several
Hold
rounds?
on.
I was gonna say my number.
I got 29.
Does anyone have more than 46?
No.
The crazy thing is, I got 18.
I had 53.
Yeah,
I
so
I only got below 5 one
I
time.
had
so.
53.
Do you really?
Mhm.
Real.
Mhm.
Okay, good one.
53.
Alright, get out.
No.
Oh!
No. 2 pieces of paper, I'll get my dice later. 2 pieces of paper, pen and pencil. Alright.
Do we have that too?
Yeah, because you're close enough now at this point where you might could cheat off each other.
Can we
You're
go
really
open
dedicated.
vote?
You're really dedicated.
Can I go open vote?
Somebody wants to help out?
Yes.
Open vote?
No.
Oh.
You said yes.
It's cheating if you help out a homie that way.
Is
So
it
even
though?
if we use silence.
What is it, Rick?
You
Technically.
can't save the homies if you aren't a homie.
That's rough. Classmate wants to help you out, still no.
Yes, home.
I get really
Reckon you're a home.
That's 5 or
Sorry,
10?
Brecken. 10.
Uh,
Piece of
we'll leave
paper,
it at
pen and
five.
pencil.
Is there gonna be a B at the end or no?
We will find
Alright.
out.
One
Depends how I feel.
I need 2
Five.
pieces.
You said don't ask it afterwards.
Yeah.
Watch this, y'all ready for this?
No.
It was a good try.
It's 10, 20, 20, 20.
It is. Junior high were pointing that out to me earlier.
Oh, wait,
How can we not do 5 questions?
Alright,
Which
because
quiz is
5
it?
questions are. I'm gonna look up my piece of paper.
This is.
You know what, just write quiz, I'll sort it out later. I'm
Quiz
pretty sure this is
Genesis.
quiz, I
Oh.
think 20, actually, but I
That's
will
right.
double check
I
that.
think
Do it
when we
with a
left
10,
school,
right?
we were on 18.
Yeah, and then the quizzes, numbers got a little bit mixed up, and then I fixed them, but it
Yeah,
said.
ten.
Quiz 100.
Are we on pace to break the record?
Corona affected us a little bit. Alright, so, number 1. Alright, with the idea of westward expansion, so internal improvement and land policy westward expansion, was the West for it, against it, or mixed? So, with the idea of westward expansion, going west, were the West for it, against it, or mixed? Number 2, for the bank, was the North for it, against it, or mixed? So the bank, were they for it, against it, or mixed?
To the north?
North. Number 3, for tariffs, was the South for it, against it, or mixed? So the tariffs in the South, were they for it, against it, or mixed? Alright. Number 4, what compromise brought in Missouri and Maine as states? So what compromise brought in Missouri and Maine as states? Number 5, what is the year of the favorite son's election? What is the year for the favorite son's election? Number 6, who was the favorite son of the North? Who was the favorite son of the North? Number 7, who was the favorite son of the South? Who was the favorite son of the South? Number 9, what year was the Tariff of Abominations? What year was the Tariff of Abominations? And then number 10,
What?
You skipped 9.
that was 9, wasn't it? Oh, I'm sorry, I mislabeled. That was 8 for Tariff of Abominations. Excuse me. Number 9, who wrote the South Carolina Exposition and Protest? Who wrote the South Carolina Exposition and Protest? Number 10, what was the name for Jackson's unofficial advisory group? So he had his official advisors that weren't supposed to question him, and then he had his unofficial, real advisor group that he actually listened to. And because of Corona, 2 weeks being off, right, B for bonus. You're welcome. Who wrote? Well, okay. Who with the idea idea of Congress, you had someone support states' rights, someone support the Union. Who supported states' rights?
Who?
Who supported states' rights to Congress? Remember you had that great debate? So who supported states' rights? Who supported the Union?
What is
To
that?
start with.
No, like who just defended states' rights? That's the
Oh.
question, that's the
You
B.
should like really tell us where it starts from. Please. I wrote it down, but I forgot.
That's a bummer. I'm sorry.
What's
So,
number
we're just
seven?
trying to, alright, so B, so we're all clear, who defended states' rights to Congress?
7.
Alright, you number 7 repeated?
15.
Number 7, who was the favorite son of the South?
What's it start with?
Nope. Craig Harding guessed. Alright, anyone else, did anything repeated?
I need like 10 seconds.
Okay. You good to go?
I
Sure.
don't know if I'm good, but yes.
Alright, anyone wanna see more time? Alright, go ahead and hand it to me, as I go ahead and get out your textbook. Alright, we can't go over the answer just in case Jamie has to wait and take it later. We'll probably took it with us, but just in case.
That's mine.
Alright, now remember, what is tomorrow?
President.
President's quiz, so
President's
go
song.
online. Depending on which song y'all have listened to, I don't wanna throw y'all off, so whatever
I
song.
will
Aren't they all the same?
Some of them have different, have different tunes, like the one I like is Yankee Doodle. If you Google President List Yankee Doodle, you'll find it. Or if you really want me to like
I don't know the
show it
difference.
for you.
Show it.
No, we don't have time to show it right now. But it's one of those, okay, if you need it during study hall, ask me, and I'll show you, I'll give you the, I'll give you
Are we
the
doing all the presidents?
You will eventually, right now it's just the first 25, it's up to McKinley. But I've been telling you this for over a week now, so make sure,
This is
you can
harder
study.
than the states.
Maybe, I
Yeah,
guess.
we only
It
have
probably
10.
is.
Maybe, it'll just be literally, alright, 1 through 25, go. Right, each one's worth 4 points.
Oh.
Because
I know,
you
I
know that
know.
it's just
Don't
4
care
points
about
each for.
following.
They always have to know.
Alright, let's keep going. So, look over on page number, we did a good review today, but look over on page number 152, technically that's where we left off. Alright, your book talks about we have more of a democratic spirit in America. You start to having more of national politics, as you would recognize, 152, yeah. So you're having the new age in American politics, where you're having more people having the ability to vote, and your book introduces 2 terms at the top of page 152. Alright, suffrage and franchise. Alright, your book tells you that they both mean the right to vote, and yes, they both loosely mean the right to vote, but does anyone know specifically what's the difference between suffrage and franchise? Like we hear about women's suffrage, but why don't you hear about women's franchise, and why do they want women's suffrage in particular? Does anyone know what the differences are? Your book does not tell you.
Franchise about suffrage.
Okay, well they both mean right to vote. So, if you're talking about like my franchise or my suffrage, you're both saying my right to vote, but there's a technical difference between them. That's what how you hear the word suffrage used more. Does anyone know? Okay.
Isn't suffrage the ability to vote?
You close, kind of. The idea of suffrage means you have the right from within, like it is my right to vote. Franchise has more of the idea of the government gives you the right to vote. So, if the government gives you the right to vote, what can the government also do? Take it away. This is how come you don't hear about franchise used as right to vote all that much. Because people say, no, it's the right to vote. It is my right to vote as an American. And so that's the idea of women's suffrage. You hear more of it. You hear it used that way. Because they didn't want women's franchise. They didn't want the government to give them the right to vote. They said, no, we wanted to acknowledge that it's our right to vote. So that's what I'm just pointing out, even though your book points out that technically they both mean right to vote. It's the idea of suffrage means that it's my right to vote, it comes from within, while franchise means the government's giving it to you. But if it starts talking about how, as a side note, how you have voting through franchise, that's starting to get a little bit dangerous because they're saying, hey, you have the right to vote because the government gives it to you. And if the government has given it to you, the government can also take it away. So this is a side note for it. So, make a note though, this was first widely extended though in the frontier area in the West. Because originally, what did you have to have in order to have the right to vote in America? Someone raise your hand, remembers? Alright?
Citizenship first year, and then you had to be a man.
Yeah, you had to be a guy typically because they would assume your wife and family would vote with you. And then what else did you have to have?
You can't be black.
No, okay, that was not one.
I thought I seriously thought it was one.
No,
I'm not trying to.
that's not one. Okay, what did you have to own?
Property.
Properties, that was the main idea. You had to own land. Why?
Because if you didn't own property, you could just coming to America and just vote.
Yeah, and it was because of the idea they had a lot of trappers going back and forth through it, and if a guy is just coming through and then just leaving, who cares what he votes for? He's gonna be gone in 3 days. So that's why originally you had to own land with the idea of, okay, you're gonna be staying put for a while. So it didn't matter at this time period if you were of African descent or European descent, as long as you owned land in this time period. Now, shifting over in this time period now, they're saying, okay, we have a lot of factory workers. Factory workers don't necessarily own a lot of land, or they might not own any land, they might live in more of like an apartment style, so should they have the right to vote? And so that's what you're having people starting to switch over, saying, okay, it's not necessarily the right to own land gives you the right to vote. Maybe we should start shifting it over. In the West, though, it was first widely extended, so maybe not though that this franchise or suffrage was first widely extended, saying, okay, it's not necessarily just do you own land, it's what you can do as well. So at that point, that's whenever the West in particular started saying, okay, you're going to have it to where you have the right to vote. So that was first widely extended in the West. So make a note that it kind of started in the West, and then it spread into the East. With the factory workers. The factory workers, they started voting for things that affected them in particular. So things like safer working conditions, public education, favorable taxing policies. So they started to vote more for the factory workers specifically for them. And then also they wanted to vote to end debtor's prison. Alright, what is debtor's prison? Anyone remember? Ethan.
People went to jail because they get paid debt.
Yeah, so we're still doing debtor's prison in this time period. And so the factory workers were saying, can you please not do this anymore? This isn't working. We don't like this. And so it's one of those, understandably, that seems like a good thing. So again, also keep in mind, we haven't talked about working in factories yet, but if you worked in a factory, typically you worked every day for about 14 hours, and it was unsafe in a lot of cases. So that's how come they're voting now. We want better working conditions, we want safer conditions, and it was because, again, there was a lot of people in more of the industrial cities, and so if you got hurt, bye, you're fired, and they would get somebody else in to replace you. So it was kind of a rough time period to be working in a factory. It's different than it was today. Alright, so new political tactics. So your book points out as well that, remember we talked about with Andrew Jackson, how he was introducing the idea of campaigning, like how we would recognize it today. But he's also introducing the spoils system as well. So make a note though that in parties they become so refined and they start working so well that they get the nickname of machine. So machines in this time period, they're a little bit different than how we view machines today. Like machines today run on what typically?
Fuel.
Power.
Okay, what type of power? You're right with fuel, but what type?
Electricity.
Electricity.
Fossil fuel.
Okay, yeah, so electricity. In this time period, it's more of water power or fossil fuels or wood. So it's not quite the same as it is today. But this idea you're having an industry starting. So the idea of a machine was starting this era. So that's what I'm saying, that these parties were so refined and they ran so well, they ran like a machine. So make a note that that term is not talking about factories, it's talking about machines in politics. So make a note for that with the idea of parties. They become so refined and they run so smoothly. Like I've been getting for the past month, about once a week, I get a pamphlet telling me to not vote for, I believe it's David Perdue.
John Russell.
No, I don't get him, I get the other one. Where
Raphael Warnock.
not him actually, I
It's
keep
David
specifically, I believe it's David Perdue, where they're telling me don't vote for him because he's against abortion, because he is against abortion. I don't know how I got on this list to get this letter, like once a month, it's like once a week. Yeah,
Oh, I did
probably
that same email.
is. But it's one of those where I look at it and I go, he's against abortion? Thank you for
I'm
telling me.
John Russell.
I now know who I'm voting for. And so that's part of the reason though that say yeah, your parents might start getting pamphlets like that, saying, okay, they're trying to basically influence the voters. And that's good. You want people to be educated and be informed. There's nothing wrong with having billboards and pamphlets and flags and everything else out and about that you've noticed with people seriously campaigning. But that's okay to where people are just being informed. This idea of a party working together like that to try to influence voters, that's the idea of a machine. Alright, so the spoil system, make a note over what this is, but gives you the term and then they kind of explain it. So during the Jacksonian era, you have the spoil system. This was introduced to national politics with the idea of to the victor belong the spoils. That if you win an election, because the president has the power of appointment, he in a lot of cases would fire federal officers. Now he can't fire Congress, that's not how that works. But it was the idea of he could appoint federal appointments. And so typically if your party won, the president of your party would basically reward influential people in the party by giving them basically jobs in the government. So that was just something that happened in this time period. Jackson was the first one to introduce it to national politics. I'm sorry, that looks like that hurt. But they decided later on that this spoil system does not work because just because you help the person become president, does that mean you're gonna necessarily be a good federal employee?
No.
No. And so because of that, they replaced us. We have several presidents get shot over this as a side note because of unhappy people because they felt like it was unfair and they felt like that they deserved an appointment. We're going to talk about this later on because we can mainly talk about this with Abraham Lincoln, how he was assassinated. He was not the only assassinated president. It takes a couple of them for people to realize, this particular system seems to lead to a lot of death of the presidency, so we need to not do this anymore. So your book points out the spoil system. It proved to be a poor one, and we replace it later on by saying, okay, are you a good person in this position? Okay, now you can have this job. Not just you're a friend of the president. You helped him become. You helped him get elected. So the spoil system is around though for a while. So just make a note of the spoil system with the idea of okay, if you help someone get elected, they're going to reward you basically for it. All right. Your book points out you also have the nominating convention started in this era. Originally, we had the caucus. This is in which electors met in secret sessions to choose candidates to represent the party. Today, we have the nominating conventions, and we have this as well. Does anyone know what we call these for presidential elections today? All of these have already happened for this year. Anyone know?
No.
What do you call the elections to determine who's going to basically be the candidate for a party?
Oh.
For a presidency?
Is it the debate thing?
Okay, you have debates, but there's a special time, kind of like pre-elections that happen. Like for the Republican Party,
just
they
have
all
parties.
chose the
Trump.
current president, but the Democrats, they had to do several of these first. Alright, they're called primary elections. The primaries, you might have heard of parents talking about those. That's whenever they choose, okay, here's the idea of kind of like a nominating convention of, okay, here's all the candidates for the party. Let's vote to see, okay, which one do we all want the best? And so they'll go through several different versions of the primaries typically. So make a note, a nominating convention is kind of an early version of this. This is whenever you would have a local party members, they would send delegates to country conventions so that they can nominate candidates for the county office, and eventually it gets expanded to be used on a broader field. So again, it's kind of more modern politics. You're seeing it develop in this time period. Alright, anyone have any questions about politics before we start talking about specifically what's happening in this time period after Martin Van Buren? Alright, so Martin Van Buren, that he was Jackson's successor. Basically, Jackson said, everybody vote for him. I choose him, please vote for him. And everyone basically did. Yeah, basically. Now, what was the party that was against Jackson just in politics?
Whig Party.
The Whigs. So, the Whigs said, okay, we are not losing again. Now, keep in mind, what happened during Martin Van Buren's administration that he got blamed for? Reckon.
I don't remember.
Alright, Chris?
Like the economic crisis and the depression.
Yep, remember which one it was?
The second depression.
It is. It's 1837. Make a note of that year forward. It's also 1837 that he was stuck and he was blamed for it. Now, they said, Martin Van Buren's unpopular now. He's being blamed for the depression. Here's our chance. We're going to rise up and we're just anti-Jackson and anti-Van Buren. Vote for us because we're not for them. And that's basically what they focused on. So, they chose William Henry Harrison as their presidential candidate. We've already talked about William Henry Harrison. He won in a battle. Anyone remember what the battle that he won? Alright, Ethan? Yep, so with the idea of the battle of Tippecanoe, or more, I believe it's more known as Horseshoe Bend, but it's the idea of, we took the slogan, Tippecanoe, to reference that battle for him. Then they chose John Tyler. That he was actually a Democrat, but they said, okay, this will help bring in Southern votes, because remember, it's a lot of North versus South versus West. So they said, okay, we're going to bring in William Henry Harrison. He's a general, so it's the Battle of Tippecanoe, so that makes him popular in the West. We're going to bring in a Southern Democrat, and so that way it'll help people, hopefully from the West and from the South, to vote for him. Now, the North will probably side with Andrew Jackson or Martin Van Buren again, since Martin Van Buren is the president. And they're saying, okay, that we can hopefully get in votes from those two sections. And it actually worked for them. So, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, to make a note of that slogan, that it was Tippecanoe with the idea of the general of the Battle of Tippecanoe, and Tyler too. So, it's the idea of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So, just make a note though, that that was their slogan, and they ended up winning. Alright, go ahead and flip the page. Once they won though, they didn't really know what they stood for, because their entire campaign and their entire party was based off, we don't like President Jackson, we don't like King Andrew. So now that they're asked, okay, what do you want to do? I don't know, we just didn't like what Jackson did. So they didn't know what they stood for, they didn't know what they wanted. So there was a lot of disunity, and so because of that, wait, what?
And how they win.
they just wanted the idea of we don't like Jackson policies and we don't like Martin Van Buren with the
But
great.
get rid of them, that's what they could've did.
That's basically what. Okay, so they did win, so it's not like that they assassinated him. They won, but now once they
But
won,
get rid of the acts and all the things that Jackson did.
but they couldn't decide on how to do it and what to replace it. So they would have to vote because they also won the majority in Congress, so they couldn't agree on what to do to fix it. Everyone knew that they hated Jackson, but they couldn't agree on what do you do to fix it then. And so everyone had different ideas. So it's one of those they couldn't agree together saying what should we do to change this to fix it for it. So they couldn't agree upon a legislative program saying, okay, we don't like his, so what are we gonna do? Oh no, I just didn't like his. And so they didn't have a good over idea. They couldn't work together to really decide what do they want to do. Unfortunately for the Whig Party, 31 days after Harrison gave his inaugural address, he died. This is the first president to die in office, to make it over him. He gave his speech in March. Now it was raining and he didn't want to put on an overcoat because he thought it would make him look like a weaker president. But then he ended up dying of pneumonia 31 days later. So, make a note for him that Harrison was the first president to die in office. So, he gave the longest inaugural address in the shortest term. He ended up dying because of it. So, make a note. So, William Henry Harrison
So
was
he
the only
legit served
president.
2 weeks.
What?
He served like 2 weeks.
Well, 31 days.
So 4 weeks.
Yeah, and then he died. That was it. So, Tyler becomes president after him. No, keep in mind, was Tyler part of the Whig Party? No, he was a Democrat. So he said, okay, I don't even agree with what the Whigs want and what they say to do. So the Whig Party and Tyler become directly against each other. So much so his entire cabinet quits because they don't want to deal with him. Except for Daniel Webster, because Daniel Webster was busy negotiating with England and he said, I'm not quitting right now. I'm in the middle of this, I can't leave. But that's part of the reason as to how come Tyler becomes known as the president without a party. Make a note of that. I know it's not bolded or italicized, but you need to know it. So right above Daniel Webster's slightly scowling face on page 154, where it talks about Tyler, that he became known as a president without a party. So be sure to mark that phrase, note that for him. So just because Tyler and the Whigs just don't get along, so he ends up just saying, okay, I'm not part of any party at this point. Alright, let's read about Daniel Webster really quick. Alright, who wants to read first? Y'all get a chance to use your voices. Alright, Genesis.
Daniel Webster was one of America's best-known orators. Whether arguing a legal case, addressing his colleagues in Congress, or advising one of the 3 presidents under whom he served, Webster influenced others by his arguments.
Good job. Alright, what's your next? Quentin, you haven't read, like, ever.
Webster's speaking ability made him a successful lawyer. After graduating from Dartmouth College, he studied law in Boston and then established a successful law practice in New Hampshire. Later he practiced law in Boston. Webster appeared before the United States Supreme Court in the famous case Dartmouth College versus Woodward, in which he argued the New Hampshire's attempt to take control of the private college was unconstitutional. The justices ruled in his favor. Though this and other cases, Daniel Webster influenced the opinions of Chief Justice John Marshall and the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution.
Good job. Now remember, we've already talked about this with John Marshall and Dartmouth College versus Woodward, with the idea of the state basically saying, okay, you were a public institution, but now we're going to make you into a public institution. You went from being private to public. So, again, your book just talking about that. He was basically the lawyer for that case. Alright, who wants to read next? Okay.
Webster's oratorical abilities also served him well in the political arena. Over the years, he served in both houses of Congress and as Secretary of State under 3 presidents: Harrison, Tyler, and Fillmore.
Good job. Way to take the short one. Alright, let's read the last one. Alright, Rick, it's gotta be you.
Daniel Webster demonstrated a great respect for Christianity. He gave God the glory for his ability as an orator. If there be anything in my style or thought worthy to be commended, he acknowledged, the credit is due to my kind parents in instilling into my early mind a love for scriptures. As a talented lawyer, a successful statesman, and a staunch nationalist,
Good job.
Daniel Webster used his great speaking abilities to advance the cause of the American Republic.
Good job. So, important thing to know about Daniel Webster. Alright, make a note that he defended the Union with the idea of the Hayne-Webster debate, but then also make a note that he is known as one of America's best-known orators. Alright, so diplomacy with Great Britain. So this is what Daniel Webster was involved with in this era. Trying to figure out, okay, with Great Britain, I want to keep peace with Great Britain as much as possible. Now, Great Britain was still an important superpower in this era, so angry or going to war against Great Britain was not a good idea. So, Canada was going through kind of their own, kind of not mini revolution, but there was conflict between Canada and Great Britain. Some of the Americans were getting involved in it whenever they weren't supposed to, and so because of it, they got caught in the crosshairs. So one of the major events was that the militia in Canada, whenever they caught the American ship, the Caroline, they said, okay, you're smuggling goods across the border to this rebel group. You're not supposed to be doing that. So they lit it on fire, because you're not supposed to be helping out on the rebel group. Unfortunately, one American was killed. Now, you're not supposed to kill someone else's citizen in your own territory. Remember, we almost went to war with Spain and with England whenever Andrew Jackson invaded Florida. So because of that, it's one of those, it's a sticky situations where they realized, oh, we killed a person and we weren't really supposed to. Now, Daniel Webster realized, okay, the Americans were getting involved where they weren't supposed to, and we need to settle this peaceably. So, sorry Americans, you should not have been doing this in the first place. So, the Secretary for England and Daniel Webster were trying to basically blend it together and just solve the conflict. So, Lord Ashburton, make note of him, that he was married to an American woman, so he understood the American culture, so he was able to work with the Americans to help avoid conflict. Alright, we'll stop there. I'll finish talking about this tomorrow. Alright, you know for tonight? Alright, catching up. Read pages 159 to page 164. Page 159 to 164. Answer on page 161, questions 1 through 6. And on page 164, questions 1 through 8. You'll be fine. Read pages 159 to 164. Answer on page 161, questions 1 through 6. And on page 164, questions 1 through 8.
Can we put through even on 164, please? That's 14 questions.
Nope.
That's like the most we've ever done.